There was no will. There were no written instructions. There was no letter explaining how to run the farm, or who to call when something went wrong, or what to do about the insurance. There was a file folder. It was a green cardboard folder, the kind that came free from the insurance agent's office, and it had been sitting in the second drawer of the metal filing cabinet in the farm office for 3 years when Margaret Chorney found it in the autumn of 1977. The tab on the folder said, "Crop Insurance, 1974, in her husband's handwriting. She had not opened it when he filed it. She had not opened it when he died, in March of 1977, 8 weeks after a heart attack that had given no warning and left her with 480 acres of Saskatchewan wheat ground, 2 teenage sons, a land note at the credit union, and no clear understanding of what her husband had been paying for every year when the insurance premium came due. She opened it in October, when the adjuster from the crop insurance office in Saskatoon called and asked how she wanted to proceed with the claim. She said she would call him back. She said she'd call him back. That's it. Husband gone 8 months, farm to run, a phone call she didn't understand, and she said she'd call him back. Bought herself time to sit down with the file and figure out what she actually had. Lorne Chorney had started farming the flat ground outside Outlook in Rupert's Land District in 1961, the year after he and Margaret were married. The land was good, dark soil, reliable moisture in most years, the kind of ground that produced consistent wheat if you managed it carefully and did not push it harder than the rainfall would support. He was a careful farmer and a quiet man who made decisions slowly and changed them rarely. The crop insurance file was consistent with how he had operated in everything else. He had added something to the standard policy in 1974 and had not mentioned it to anyone, not because he was secretive, but because he did not consider it worth discussing. He had seen a risk that the standard policy did not cover, and he had paid to cover it. That was the end of it, from his perspective. Margaret had managed the household accounts for 17 years and had a clear understanding of the farm's finances in most respects. She knew what the land note cost each year and when it was due. She knew the equipment loan schedule, a tractor financed in 1971 and a combine from 1969 that had been refinanced once. She knew which grain elevator in Outlook paid the best basis in most years and what the property tax bill looked like in a good year versus a short one. She had signed the tax returns every year since 1961 and had reviewed the annual financial summaries that Lorne had prepared at the kitchen table each January, usually on a Sunday after church when the boys were occupied elsewhere and the house was quiet enough to concentrate. She had not been involved in the crop insurance decisions. Lorne had handled those himself, as he had handled the agronomic decisions about wheat varieties and seeding rates and the timing of chemical applications, the operational side of the farm that he had always managed without consultation, not from any desire to exclude her, but because those decisions had always been his domain, and the arrangement had worked, and neither of them had thought to change it. He had been farming for 16 years when he died. The insurance file in the second drawer of the metal cabinet represented 16 years of premium payments and policy renewals that Margaret had seen the invoices for, but had never needed to understand in detail. She needed to understand them now. The adjuster's call had made that clear. She set the file on the kitchen table and opened it. When the adjuster called in October of 1977, he asked about the claim for the rusted wheat. The 1977 growing season in the Outlook district had been difficult in a specific way. The spring planting had gone well. Margaret and her older son had handled the seeding together. Working from the notes Lorne had left in the field records about his preferred seeding dates and rates for each quarter section, and they had gotten the crop in within the window he would have used. The summer moisture had been adequate, maybe slightly above average, which had looked like good fortune through June and July when the crop was establishing, and the neighbors were commenting that it was shaping up to be a reasonable year. The problem arrived in August. A wet, warm stretch that ran from the first week of August through the third produced conditions that promoted wheat rust, a fungal disease that spread through a field with damaging speed when humidity was high and temperatures stayed above 15 degrees Celsius through the night. Margaret had seen rust before. Lorne had pointed it out to her in 1971 when a light infection had come through the district, but she had not seen it at the scale it arrived in August of 1977. When she and her older son walked the fields in the third week of August, the characteristic orange-brown pustules were visible on the leaves and stems across the lower-lying ground of the east quarter, and had spread into the adjoining fields as well. By the time they finished walking all 320 seeded acres, they estimated that 220 of them showed significant rust infection. The yield on the affected ground, when they combined it in September, came in at 14 bushels per acre against their normal expectation of 32 to 38. The unaffected 100 acres came in at 31 bushels. The farm's total wheat production for 1977 was well below the insured guarantee. The standard crop insurance policy that Saskatchewan farmers carried in 1977 was a multi-peril yield coverage product that paid out when yield fell below a defined percentage of the insured production guarantee. The Chorney operation had a guarantee based on their 10-year average yield. The rust damage had clearly triggered the yield threshold. That was not in question. What the adjuster was calling about was something more specific. His question, which Margaret had not understood in the way he intended when he first asked it, was whether she wanted to proceed on the standard yield basis or under the named peril endorsement. She had not known there was a named peril endorsement. She wrote the phrase on a piece of paper and set it beside the file so she would remember to ask the adjuster what it meant when she called him back. Then she kept reading. The file folder contained 3 documents. The first was the standard policy renewal for the 1974 crop year, a 4-page document with the premium amount and the coverage terms. The second was a 1-page endorsement dated June of 1974, titled Rupert's Land District, named peril rider, wheat rust, and stem rust, and signed by Lorne at the bottom with a notation of the additional premium he had paid, $312. The third document was a single handwritten note in Lorne's handwriting that said, "Rust came through in 67 and 71 both. Extension office says the stripe rust pressure is building again in this district. Rider adds specific rust coverage on top of standard yield. Pays separately on rust-damaged acres at a different calculation than the yield floor." Margaret read all 3 documents at the kitchen table on the evening after the adjuster called. Then she called her older son, who was 17 and had been working alongside her on the farm since March, and asked him to read them too. He read them and said he thought the third document was explaining why his father had paid for the endorsement. She said she thought so too. She called the adjuster the following morning. She said she'd call him back. That's it. Husband gone 8 months, farm to run, a phone call she didn't understand, and she said she'd call him back. Bought herself time to sit down with the file and figure out what she actually had. The named peril rider worked differently from the standard yield coverage in a way that mattered significantly for the Chorney claim. The standard yield coverage calculated the payment based on the shortfall between the insured guarantee and the actual total farm yield, a calculation that blended the rust-damaged acres with the undamaged acres and produced a single farm-wide figure. Under that calculation, the Chorney claim would have yielded a payment of approximately $8,400. The named peril rider calculated the rust damage separately at the per-acre level on the specifically identified rust-affected acres. It paid on the documented damage to the 220 affected acres as a distinct event, rather than folding that damage into the whole farm yield calculation. The rider's payment formula, applied to 220 acres at the documented rust damage level, produced a figure of $14,200. The $312 annual premium that Lorne had been paying since 1974, 3 years of premiums totaling $936, had created an additional $5,800 in claim payment in a year when the specific risk he had paid to cover had materialized in the 3rd year of the coverage. Margaret sat with that arithmetic for a moment before she called the adjuster back. $936 spent across 3 years, a payment of $14,200 instead of $8,400. She was not a person who expressed things dramatically, but she noted to her older son that his father had been correct about the rust cycle and had paid accordingly. Her son asked how his father had known. She said she didn't yet know the full answer to that, but that she thought the note in the file explained part of it. She called the adjuster the following morning and told him she wanted to proceed under the named peril endorsement. He asked if she had any questions about the process. She said she had several, but that she would start with the most basic. Could he explain in plain terms how the per-acre calculation for the rust damage would work on the 220 affected acres? He explained it. She wrote it down as he spoke. When he finished, the numbers she had written matched the figure he gave her as the expected settlement amount. She said that was clear, thank you, and ended the call. The claim was processed and paid within the standard 30-day settlement period. The payment was $14,200. Her land note payment at the credit union was due in November. The payment was $11,400. The insurance payment covered the land note with $2,800 remaining for the operating account. She found the note in the file the second time she went through it, in November, after the land payment had been made and the operating account had been reconciled for the year. She had gone back to the file not because she needed to, but because she wanted to understand it fully, to know what else was in there that she might have missed the first time, and to read Lorne's handwriting again in the way that people read the handwriting of someone they have lost when they want to hear the voice behind the words. She had missed it the first time because it had been folded inside the standard policy renewal rather than sitting separately. It was written on a piece of notepaper from the Farm Credit Office in Saskatoon, dated April 1974, in Lorne's handwriting. Extension figures show rust cycles run roughly 6 to 8 years in this district. We had it bad in 67 and again in 71. If the pattern holds, next hit could come between 77 and 79. Rider costs $312 a year. If it pays once at anywhere near what it could, it covers several years of premiums easily, probably worth carrying until the cycle passes. He had been right about the timing. He had paid for 3 years of coverage against a risk he had identified from historical pattern data available through the Provincial Extension Service at a cost of $936 total, and the risk had materialized in the 3rd year of coverage. Margaret kept the file folder in the same second drawer where she had found it. She added the adjuster's settlement letter to it, and the credit union receipt showing the November land payment, and the note she had found folded in the policy renewal. She filed it back in the drawer under Crop Insurance 1974, the same tab her husband had written, in the same green cardboard folder that had sat there unused for 3 years before she needed it. The following spring, when the insurance agent called about renewing the coverage for the 1978 crop year, she asked whether the named peril rust rider was still available and what the current premium was. The agent said it was available. The premium had increased slightly to $340. He said most policyholders in the district had dropped the rust rider after the 1977 season on the theory that rust cycles did not repeat in consecutive years. He mentioned this not as a recommendation but as information. Margaret said she understood. She asked him to keep the rider on the policy. She kept it on the policy every year after that. She did not know with certainty when the next rust cycle would arrive or how severe it would be. She knew that Lorne had identified a pattern and had paid $312 per year to cover it, and that the $312 had been the right call in 1977, and that the cost of being wrong about the rust was larger than the cost of the annual premium. That arithmetic had not changed. She ran the Chorney farm for 11 more years before her older son was ready to take it over fully. During that time, she read every document in the second drawer of the metal filing cabinet and built, page by page, the same understanding of the operation's financial structure that Lorne had carried in his head for 16 years. It took her about 3 years to feel like she knew it as well as he had. She thought he probably would have said she was being too hard on herself about the timeline. A crop insurance file is just paperwork until the season arrives that makes it something else.